In the heat of July 3, 1778, the Pennsylvania frontier faced one of the darkest moments of the Revolutionary War, a confrontation so brutal it would be etched in memory as the Battle of Wyoming or the Wyoming massacre. It's an unsettling reminder of the lengths people went to, not just for survival but for revenge and power. This is the story of betrayal, division, and the devastating price of war. The scene is set in the Wyoming Valley in northeastern Pennsylvania, a place that today would be synonymous with natural beauty, but back then, it was ground zero in a struggle over land, loyalty, and survival. This fertile valley was home to a mix of American settlers, Loyalists who supported the British Crown, and the Iroquois Confederacy, Native American nations who had been caught in the middle of an escalating conflict, pressured to take sides in a war that was, in many ways, not theirs. Now, the British had a new strategy in 1778. Instead of directly clashing with the Continental Army, they turned their attention to striking vulnerable frontier settlements. And that's where Colonel John Butler, a Loyalist officer with a strong following among the Iroquois, comes in. Butler, leading a force of roughly 1,000 strong, included British Loyalists known as Butler's Rangers and a formidable alliance of Seneca and Cayuga warriors. For them, this wasn't just a raid, it was an opportunity to make a statement, to claim territory, and to drive fear into the heart of the American resistance. Meanwhile, the settlers of Wyoming, Pennsylvania were scrambling. News of the Loyalists and their Iroquois allies' march reached them, but it didn't give them nearly enough time. Their militia, under the command of Colonel Zebulon Butler, no relation to John Butler, consisted mostly of farmers and townspeople with limited military training and a patchwork of weapons. Colonel Butler rallied a force of around 300 to face an enemy that outnumbered them more than 3 to 1, knowing they had little chance but determined to stand their ground. The two forces met at Forty Fort, near the banks of the Susquehanna River. The Loyalists and their Iroquois allies moved in fast, using the terrain and dense forest cover to their advantage. The Pennsylvania militia, lacking both the numbers and the strategic advantage, tried to form a line and hold their ground, but soon the battle turned chaotic. Imagine this: gunfire echoes through the valley, smoke billows, and the two sides clash in a desperate fight. But the Iroquois warriors had tactics that the militiamen were utterly unprepared for. They moved swiftly, using guerrilla-style combat, surrounding the Americans and effectively trapping them with nowhere to retreat. And this wasn't just a battle, it was an overwhelming rout. Within a short span, most of the militia were either unalived or forced to flee, and those who attempted to run were cut down in a chase that was nothing short of a massacre. By the end, an estimated 225 Americans lay dead, and Butler's forces captured Forty Fort, leaving the settlement defenseless. For the American settlers, it wasn't just a devastating loss in terms of numbers, it was a complete psychological blow. The scenes that followed were, by many accounts, nothing short of horrific. The Iroquois, driven by revenge for their own losses and injustices, took brutal retribution on the dead and dying. And the settlers who managed to escape were left with one choice: abandon their homes and flee to the safety of larger towns further south, leaving the Wyoming Valley to the victors. This event resonated far beyond Pennsylvania. It sent shockwaves through the colonies as news spread, rallying support for the war effort and intensifying hatred against the British allied Native Americans. "Remember Wyoming" became a rallying cry, a dark reminder of the brutal stakes at hand and the lengths the British and their allies were willing to go to quash the revolution. In the grand narrative of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Wyoming stands as a reminder of the brutality of frontier warfare, where traditional battle lines blurred and survival sometimes outweighed honor. For John Butler and his Loyalists, it was a tactical success, but for the American settlers and their families, it was a nightmare that would haunt them for years.